In the spring of 1942, as World War II intensified in the Pacific, Japan sought to divert Allied attention from its planned assault on Midway Island. Following rapid expansions after Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces aimed to isolate Australia by targeting its ports, though a full invasion was logistically unfeasible. The Sydney Harbour raid was part of a broader strategy, mirroring a simultaneous attack on Diego Suarez in Madagascar to mislead allies about Japan's intentions. Reconnaissance flights in February and May, using Yokosuka E-14Y1 Glenn floatplanes from submarines like I-21 and I-29, identified Sydney as a vulnerable target hosting key Allied ships. The operation was led by the IJN's 8th Submarine Squadron, commanded by Captain Hankyu Sasaki aboard I-21. The force included B-1 type submarines, I-21, I-27, I-29, and C-1 type, I-22, I-24, reduced from 6 after I-28's sinking by a US torpedo. Each midget, manned by 2 crew members, included M14, Lieutenant Chuma Kenshi and Petty Officer Omori Takeshi, who scuttled their vessel; M21, Lieutenant Matsuo Keiyu and Petty Officer Tsuzuku Masao, who committed suicide after attacks; and M24, Lieutenant Bankatsu Hisa and Petty Officer Ashibe Mamoru, whose fate was unknown until 2006. On the Allied side, Rear Admiral Gerard Muirhead Gould oversaw Sydney Harbour defences, facing criticism for scepticism and delays. Key vessels included USS Chicago, Captain Howard Bode, HMAS Canberra and HMAS Adelaide, supported by patrol boats like HMAS Yaroma, Lolita, Steady Hour, Sea Mist and Yandra. Organisations such as the Royal Australian Navy, US Navy, Maritime Services Board and Fleet Radio Unit Melbourne played roles, though intelligence intercepts failed to prompt timely alerts. Stakeholders extended to Australian sailors, 21 killed on Kuttabul, merchant crews, 50 deaths in follow-up attacks, and civilians in Sydney's eastern suburbs and Newcastle, who endured property damage and trauma, sparking westward migrations and housing price shifts. Japanese families mourned the lost crews, whose ashes were repatriated with honours. Post-war, descendants, historians and heritage groups like the Australian War Memorial and NSW government became involved in preservation. The raid unfolded in Sydney Harbour. Port Jackson, coordinates approximately 33 degrees 51 minutes 30 seconds south, 151 degrees 14 minutes 0 seconds east, a strategic deep water base with incomplete defences like partial boom nets and faulty indicator loops. Midgets launched offshore, entering through Sydney Heads. M14 entangled and was scuttled. M21 was depth-charged and sunk. M24 fired torpedoes, missing Chicago but sinking Kuttabul at 12:30 a.m. on June 1st. Follow-up included merchant sinkings, Iron Chieftain, Iron Crown, Guatemala, and June 8th bombardments. I-24 shelled Sydney, targeting the Harbour Bridge, and I-21 hit Newcastle, aiming at BHP Steelworks, with Fort Scratchley firing back, the only Australian fort to engage an enemy warship. The harbour's geography aided infiltration but constrained escapes, while urban elements like ferries and floodlights influenced tactics. The attacks caused limited material damage but profound psychological effects, dispelling Australia's sense of isolation and boosting defences, convoys and volunteerism. No major inquiry followed to avoid panic under Prime Minister John Curtin. Recovered midgets toured for fundraising, £28,000, and M24's wreck, found in 2006 off Bungan Head, is now protected. The event highlighted midget submarine flaws, leading to their program's decline, and fostered reconciliation through ceremonies like the 2007 sake-pouring tribute aboard HMAS Newcastle. In the midst of World War II's Pacific Theatre, the Japanese Imperial Navy launched a daring operation against Australian shores, infiltrating Sydney Harbour with midget submarines to disrupt Allied forces. This raid, occurring from late May to early June 1942, was not merely a tactical strike, but a calculated diversion designed to mislead the Allies ahead of the decisive Battle of Midway. While the physical destruction was modest, sinking only an auxiliary vessel and causing minor coastal damage, the event shattered perceptions of Australia's invulnerability, exposing defensive lapses and igniting widespread fear. Drawing from historical records, including naval archives and post-war analyses, this detailed examination explores the strategic motivations, key participants, step-by-step execution, geographic influences, timeline, and enduring impacts of this unique chapter in wartime history. Japan's aggressive expansion in the Pacific, following the December 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor, created a need for innovative tactics to maintain momentum against a resurgent Allied coalition. By mid-1942, setbacks like the Battle of the Coral Sea had halted advances toward key objectives such as Port Moresby, prompting Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto to orchestrate diversions that would scatter Allied resources. The Sydney Harbour operation was conceived as part of this strategy, aiming to simulate threats of southern invasions and draw naval assets away from Midway. Underlying causes included Japan's limited capacity for large-scale invasions of Australia, leading to a focus on disruption rather than conquest. Midget submarines, or Ko-Hyoteki-class vessels, were selected for their stealth potential. Building on lessons from Pearl Harbor where similar units had failed due to instability and detection issues. Upgrades for the Sydney mission emphasized improved handling, submerged launches from motherships, and specialized crew training for high-risk infiltrations. The primary goals were to sink high-value targets, prioritizing aircraft carriers, battleships, and cruisers like USS Chicago, to weaken Allied Pacific operations, interrupt merchant shipping, and generate psychological panic. This would foster invasion fears, straining Australian morale and resources while masking Japan's true intentions in the Central Pacific. Reconnaissance was integral to planning. Beginning in February 1942, Warrant Officer Nobuo Fujita's flights from ORISH 25 scouted Australian and New Zealand harbours, identifying Sydney's concentration of warships. Further scouts in May by I-21 and I-29 confirmed vulnerabilities, though partial Allied intercepts via signals intelligence were largely dismissed as anomalies. The operation was executed by the IJN's Eastern Attack Group from the 8th Submarine Squadron, commanded by Captain Hankyu Sasaki aboard the flagship Yed 21. Originally 6 vessels, the force was reduced to 5 after I-28 was torpedoed by USS Tautog on May 17th. B-1 type submarines, I-21, I-27, and I-29, plus C-1 type I-22 and I-24. These carried the 3 midget submarines, M14, launched from I-27, M21 from I-22, and M24 from I-24, each a 46-ton, 78-foot vessel armed with 2 torpedoes and manned by elite 2-man crews trained for suicide missions if necessary. The midget crews embodied the operation's human element. M14's Lieutenant Chuma Kenshi and Petty Officer Omori Takeshi scuttled their entangled vessel to avoid capture. M21's Lieutenant Matsuo Keiyu and Petty Officer Tsuzuku Masao committed suicide amid depth-charge assaults. M24's Lieutenant Ban Katsuhisa and Petty Officer Ashibe Mamoru escaped the harbour but perished when their submarine sank offshore. Reconnaissance pilots like Ito Susumu from I-21 provided critical mapping, flying low over the harbour despite risks. Allied defences were coordinated by Rear Admiral Gerard Muirhead Gould, the Royal Navy officer in charge of Sydney Harbour, whose initial scepticism, dismissing early detections as false alarms, drew post-war scrutiny. Key warships included the US heavy cruiser USS Chicago under Captain Howard Bode, Australian heavy cruiser HMAS Canberra, light cruiser HMAS Adelaide, and the depot ship HMAS Kootabool, a converted ferry serving as barracks. Patrol assets comprised auxiliary boats such as HMAS Yoroma, Lolita, Steady Hour, Seamist, and Yandra, supported by anti-submarine infrastructure like indicator loops and an incomplete boom net. Organisations involved extended beyond the military. The Maritime Services Board managed harbour operations, the Royal Australian Air Force conducted searches, and Frumell intercepted Japanese communications, though failures in dissemination delayed responses. Post-event, the Australian War Memorial and Royal Australian Navy Heritage Centre preserved artefacts, while amateur divers and the NSW government handled the 2006 discovery of M24's wreck. Stakeholders encompassed a wide spectrum. Australian military personnel bore the direct brunt, with 21 sailors, 19 RAN, 2 Royal Navy, killed and 10 wounded on Kootabool. Their families honoured in ceremonies like the June 3, 1942, burial attended by Muirhead Gould. Merchant mariners suffered 50 fatalities in follow-up sinkings, while US forces on Chicago escaped unharmed but recognised shared vulnerabilities. Japanese stakeholders included the families of the 6 submariners, whose cremated remains were repatriated in August 1942 aboard Kamakura Maru, greeted by crowds in Yokohama as propaganda symbols. Civilians in Sydney's eastern suburbs and Newcastle experienced debris injuries and property damage from bombardments. But the psychological impact was profound, triggering mass westward exoduses to safer areas like the Blue Mountains. This led to depressed property values in exposed regions and inflated prices inland, alongside surges in volunteer defence enrolments. The Australian government under Prime Minister John Curtin prioritised morale, eschewing a public inquiry to prevent defeatism after earlier Darwin bombings. Long-term stakeholders include descendants, historians, and heritage bodies, ensuring ongoing commemoration through memorials like Lieutenant Cantello Reserve, established 1988, and protected sites. Sydney Harbour, or Port Jackson, served as the epicentre, a vast natural inlet at approximately 33 degrees 51 minutes 30 seconds south, 151 degrees 14 minutes 0 seconds east, flanked by north and south heads. As a major Allied base, it hosted warships at Garden Island, but wartime shortages left defences incomplete. The boom net from Middle Head to Inner South Head had 400-metre gaps, and many indicator loops were inactive amid civilian traffic. This geography enabled initial penetration. M24 tailed a ferry through the net undetected, but constrained manoeuvres in confined bays like Taylor's Bay, where M21 was cornered. Urban factors, such as floodlit docks, silhouetting targets, and ongoing ferry operations, aided Japanese aiming, but also heightened detection risks. Secondary sites included eastern coastal waters for merchant attacks, from Garbo Island to Brisbane, and bombardment positions. I-24 fired from 9 miles south-southeast of Macquarie Lighthouse at Sydney's Harbour Bridge, with shells scattering in suburbs. I-21 targeted Newcastle's BHP Steelworks from 9 kilometres northeast of Stockton Beach, prompting Fort Scratchley's historic counterfire. The locations amplified outcomes. Shallow waters limited depth charge effectiveness on M14, while offshore instability caused inaccurate shelling, minimising material damage but maximising fear in populated areas. The Japanese midget submarine attack on Sydney Harbour in 1942 unfolded as a daring diversionary operation by the Imperial Japanese Navy amid escalating Pacific tensions, with evidence from historical records indicating it was part of a broader strategy to mislead Allied forces ahead of the Battle of Midway. Research suggests the raid began with reconnaissance in late May and culminated in a nighttime incursion that exposed defensive vulnerabilities, though it achieved limited tactical success. It seems likely that the psychological impact outweighed physical damage, fostering invasion fears in Australia without significantly altering the war's trajectory. Key controversies include debates over Allied command delays and the effectiveness of midget submarine tactics, with some accounts highlighting leadership skepticism that may have prolonged the threat. The operation's prelude involved Japanese submarines scouting Australian ports, leading to the selection of Sydney as a target due to its concentration of Allied warships. On the night of May 31st, 3 midget submarines entered the harbour, resulting in one entanglement, torpedo firings that sank a depot ship with casualties, and pursuits ending in the loss of all midgets. Subsequent events extended to merchant ship attacks and coastal bombardments in early June, amplifying public anxiety but causing minimal additional harm. While the raid succeeded in creating panic and prompting defense upgrades, it highlighted flaws on both sides, such as incomplete anti-submarine nets for the Allies and mechanical issues for the Japanese. The event remains a poignant reminder of World War II's reach to distant shores, with modern commemorations honoring victims from both nations. In the broader context of World War II's Pacific theatre, the Japanese midget submarine attack on Sydney Harbour represented a calculated effort by the Imperial Japanese Navy, IJN, to disrupt Allied operations and divert attention from the impending Battle of Midway. Drawing on enhanced Kohayoteki-class midget submarines refined after their limited success at Pearl Harbor. The strategic motivations stemmed from Japan's rapid territorial expansions post-December 1941, coupled with the need to isolate Australia without committing to a full invasion, as logistical constraints made such an endeavour impractical. Reconnaissance played a pivotal role, beginning as early as February 1942, when Warrant Officer Nobuo Fujita from submarine the First 25 conducted flights over Sydney, Melbourne, Hobart, Wellington and Auckland to assess potential targets. By early May, the Eastern Attack Group, comprising B-1 type submarines I-21, I-27, I-29, and C-1 type I-22, I-24, under Captain Hankyu Sasaki, gathered at Truk Lagoon, though I-28 was lost to a US torpedo from USS Tautog on May 17th. On May 16th, I-29 shelled the Soviet vessel Wellen near Newcastle, halting local shipping briefly but yielding no sustained Allied response, underscoring early defensive complacency. Further scouts on May 23rd by E-29 over Sydney detected warships but were dismissed as radar glitches, while I-21's flight on May 29th, piloted by Ito Susumu, confirmed high-value targets like USS Chicago, though the plane was mistaken for a US aircraft and no heightened alert followed. This intelligence, partially intercepted by Allied Signals Unit Frumel, led to Sydney's selection as the target, paralleling a simultaneous raid on Diego Suarez in Madagascar on May 30th that damaged British vessels. The main attack commenced on the evening of May 31st, 1942, as the 5 mother submarines positioned 5 to 7 nautical miles outside Sydney Heads, amid heavy seas, launching the midgets, M14 from I-27, M21 from I-22, and M24 from I-24, around 4:30 to 5:40 p.m., each manned by 2 crew members trained for infiltration. Delays from rough conditions pushed entries later. M14 crossed the indicator loop at 8:01 p.m. but was dismissed amid civilian traffic. By 8:15 p.m., it entangled in the incomplete anti-submarine boom net near the Western Gap, spotted by watchman James Cargill, who alerted patrol boat HMAS Yaroma. Investigations confirmed it as a submarine around 9:30 p.m., but depth charges from HMAS Lolita failed in shallow water. At 10:35 to 10:37 p.m., the crew, Lieutenant Chuma Kenshi and Petty Officer Omori Takeshi, scuttled the vessel with demolition charges, killing themselves and alerting the harbour. Rear Admiral Gerard Muirhead Gould issued a general alarm at 10:27 p.m., ordering anti-submarine precautions and closing the port to outbound ships, though ferries continued to force submarines submerged. M24 entered undetected at 9:48 p.m., following a Manly ferry through the net gap. Sighted near USS Chicago at 10:52 p.m., it evaded fire from the cruiser's guns and machine guns, which caused minor shore damage in suburbs like Cremorne. Around 11:14 p.m., ships were ordered darkened, but Garden Island floodlights lingered until 12:25 a.m. M21 entered shortly after, grazed by HMAS Fairley and attacked by HMAS Yandra with 6 depth charges at 11:03 p.m., surviving to hide on the harbour floor. At approximately 12:30 a.m. on June 1st, M24 fired 2 torpedoes from near Bradley's Head toward Chicago. Both missed, one beaching unexploded on Garden Island, the other exploding under HMAS Kutubul after passing beneath Dutch submarine K9, sinking the depot ship and killing 21 sailors, 19 Australian, 2 British, while wounding 10. M24 escaped, crossing the outbound loop at 1:58 a.m. High alert ensued. Chicago departed at 2:14 a.m., spotting M21's periscope at 3 a.m. as it re-entered. HMS Canimbla fired on it in Neutral Bay at 3:50 a.m. By 5 a.m., patrol boats Sea Mist, Euroma and Steady Hour cornered M21 in Taylor's Bay, dropping 19 depth charges over hours. The crew, Lieutenant Matsuo Keiyu and Petty Officer Tsuzuku Masao, committed suicide with gunshots, and the sub sank with jammed torpedoes. Post-raid, mother submarines awaited recovery off Port Hacking on June 1st to 2nd, but Frumel intercepts prompted unsuccessful Allied air searches. Sasaki abandoned efforts on June 3rd, dispersing for secondary missions. From June 1st to 25th, they targeted merchants. I-24 sank Iron Chieftain on June 3rd, 12 killed. I-27 sank Iron Crown on June 4th, 37 killed, and I-21 sank Guatemala on June 12th, no fatalities, prompting convoy systems north of Melbourne. On June 8th, I-24 bombarded Sydney from offshore after midnight, firing 10 shells toward the harbour bridge, causing minor debris injuries in eastern suburbs. Simultaneously, I-21 shelled Newcastle, targeting BHP Steelworks with 34 shells, met by Fort Scratchley's return fire. The only Australian fort to engage an enemy warship, resulting in light damage and the crash death of pilot Lieutenant George Cantello during investigation. M14 and M21 were recovered by June 8th. Their crews cremated with honours on June 9th to 10th. A composite midget toured Australia in 1943, raising £28,000 for charities and displayed at the Australian War Memorial. Ashes of Japanese crews were repatriated in August 1942. The raid's legacy includes HMAS Kutubul Base commissioning on January 1, 1943, to honour victims. M24's wreck, escaped but sunk offshore, was discovered in 2006 off Bungan Head and protected as heritage. The event exposed Allied gaps like incomplete nets and ignored warnings, while Japanese tactics revealed midget limitations, influencing program abandonment and fostering post-war reconciliation through 2007 ceremonies. Execution analysis, successes, failures, and tactical insights. The raid's unfolding highlighted Japanese ingenuity in stealthy launches, but exposed flaws like unreliable midgets prone to mechanical issues and staggered entries allowing piecemeal Allied responses. Allied failures stemmed from ignored warnings, e.g., reconnaissance flights mistaken for friendly aircraft, poor communication and leadership delays. Muirhead, Gould and Bode reportedly downplayed reports amid a dinner party. Defensive assets like patrol boats proved effective in close quarters, sinking 2 midgets with depth charges despite blackout challenges. The operation achieved partial diversionary success by heightening Australian anxiety but failed strategically, sinking only an unarmed ferry for the loss of all midgets and crews. Bombardments, using degraded munitions from unstable platforms, caused negligible damage but amplified fears. Multifaceted impacts and lasting legacy. Human and societal impacts. The raid's toll included 21 deaths on Kutubul, plus 50 in merchant sinkings and 1 pilot in the Newcastle response. Psychological effects were far-reaching, dispelling Australia's wartime isolation and prompting migrations, market disruptions, and defence volunteerism. Respectful handling of Japanese remains aimed to humanise the enemy and influence POW treatment, though results were mixed. Systemic and military changes. Exposed vulnerabilities led to completed defences, activated loops, improved alerts, and convoy systems restricting unescorted shipping north of Melbourne. The absence of an inquiry preserved public confidence under Curtin's government. Broader wartime and historical contexts. In World War II's scope, the attack underscored midget submarines' limitations, contributing to their phase-out. It boosted Allied resolve without shifting Pacific dynamics, with involved vessels like Chicago and Canberra lost in later battles, e.g. Savo Island, 1942. The event's legacy endures through education and reconciliation. Recovered midgets displayed at the Australian War Memorial, fundraising tours raising £28,000 for charities, and M24's protected wreck site. Modern commemorations, such as the 2007 ceremony aboard HMAS Newcastle pouring sake over the site, honour both Australian victims and Japanese crews, symbolising shared humanity amid conflict. This episode remains a testament to war's global reach, reminding us of how distant operations can profoundly shape national narratives and foster enduring peace efforts.